The drive from my apartment in Arlington to my parents' house in Northern Virginia felt shorter than I remembered. The late spring evening air carried the familiar scent of cut grass and blooming dogwoods as I pulled into the driveway. My black sedan looked too sleek beside my mother's old SUV and my father's truck. I sat for a moment with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the quiet settle around me. Tomorrow morning at 0900, I would walk into the Defense Tech Summit at the Crystal City Convention Center as Senior Intelligence Analyst Harper Kane from the NSA. I would be the one presenting the classified requirements and giving the final technical recommendation on a $180 million cyber defense initiative. But tonight, I was just Harper, the daughter who chose a government desk job instead of something more ambitious. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought and walked up the familiar brick path. The front door was unlocked, as always. I stepped inside and was immediately hit by the smell of roasted chicken and my mother's signature rosemary potatoes. "Harper, is that you?" Mom called from the kitchen without coming out to greet me. "Yeah, it's me." I set the wine on the entry table and walked in. My father was already at the head of the dining table, scrolling through his phone. My older brother, Ryan, and his wife, Lauren, arrived right behind me, laughing about something from the car ride. Ryan clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Hey, little sis, still pushing papers at that office of yours?" I smiled politely. Something like that. Dinner was served quickly. The conversation flowed exactly as I expected. My father beamed while Ryan talked about his startup, the latest funding round, the new contract they were pitching tomorrow at the summit, how his team was revolutionizing secure communications for the Department of Defense. My mother kept refilling his water glass and nodding with pride. Lauren added supportive comments about how hard Ryan had been working. Every few minutes, someone would glance my way and ask the same tired question. "So, Harper, how's the government job treating you?" Dad asked between bites. "Still stuck behind a desk all day?" "Pretty much," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Lots of meetings." Ryan chuckled. "You should come work with me sometime. Real innovation happens in the private sector. No bureaucracy, no waiting for approvals from 10 different people." I took a slow sip of water and said nothing. I had reviewed Ryan's company's proposal 3 weeks ago in a classified briefing. I knew every weakness in their architecture. I also knew I had personally helped him secure 2 early-stage grants years ago, money from my own savings that I never mentioned. The rest of the evening passed in the same rhythm. Praise for Ryan, polite but empty questions for me. Subtle comparisons that painted me as the safe, predictable sibling, while Ryan was the bold visionary. No one asked about the late nights I spent reading technical papers, or the classified projects that kept me in secure facilities until midnight. In this house, my work had always been reduced to a desk job. After dessert, I excused myself to the guest room upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at the walls that still held my high school debate trophies and old photos from college. Nothing from the last 8 years. No mention of my master's degree in cybersecurity, my rapid promotions at the NSA, or the commendations I kept in a locked drawer at home. I opened my overnight bag and ran my fingers over the tailored navy suit I would wear tomorrow. Tomorrow they would hear my title. Tomorrow, they would watch me brief a room full of generals, executives, and program managers. Tomorrow, the same brother who just laughed at my desk job would present his company's bid to me. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet, steady calm, the same calm I carried into secure briefings where one wrong word could affect national security. Let them have tonight. Tomorrow, everything would be different. The guest room felt smaller than it had when I was a teenager. I sat on the edge of the bed long after the house grew quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin silver lines across the floor. I should have been sleeping, but my mind kept turning over the years like pages in a classified file I couldn't seal. It started right after college. Ryan's startup idea had sounded brilliant at first. Secure communication platforms for government contractors. He was full of vision and pitch decks. I was the one with the technical background. When he needed seed money, I quietly transferred what I had saved from my first NSA internship. When his early contracts required compliance reviews, I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading every line, marking risks he would never have caught. I even helped him draft the technical sections for 2 small government grants that kept the company alive in the beginning. He presented those wins as his own. I never corrected him. Family helps family, I told myself. Years passed. Brian's confidence grew with every round of funding. Mine stayed hidden behind secure walls and non-disclosure agreements. At family gatherings, the stories were always the same. Ryan closing deals, Ryan hiring new engineers, Ryan being the one who made it. My promotions at the NSA were met with polite nods and questions about whether I was still just analyzing data. No one asked what kind of data. No one wanted to know about the late nights in skiffs or the briefings where my recommendations shaped multi-million-dollar decisions. Tonight at dinner had been no different. Ryan had spoken for nearly 40 minutes about the summit tomorrow, how his team's proposal was game-changing, how this contract could take the company to the next level. My father had listened with shining eyes. My mother had beamed like Ryan had already won. When the conversation turned to me, it lasted less than 30 seconds. "Still enjoying the government life?" Dad had asked. "It has its moments," I replied. Ryan laughed. "You should try the private sector sometime, Harp. Real pressure, real rewards." I hadn't answered. What could I say? That I had already reviewed the classified requirements for the exact project he was pitching? That I knew the weaknesses in his proposed architecture better than his own engineers did? That the desk job they mocked was the reason his company even had a chance at this bid? I stood up and walked to the window. The neighborhood was dark and still. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of Washington, D.C. on the horizon. Tomorrow, I would walk into that summit not as someone's little sister, but as the senior analyst whose technical evaluation could greenlight or kill proposals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My clearance level was higher than most people in the room would ever see. My recommendations carried weight that could shift budgets and careers. Yet here, in this house, I was still the quiet one, the safe one, the daughter who hadn't taken the bold path. I changed into sleep clothes and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The old resentment tried to rise, but I let it pass. Anger would cloud my judgment tomorrow, and I couldn't afford that. My job demanded precision and objectivity. So did this moment. For years, I had been the invisible support holding parts of Ryan's dream together. I had done it without asking for credit, without expecting thanks. Tonight, lying in my childhood bed, I finally admitted to myself that the support had become one-sided a long time ago. I had stopped expecting them to see me clearly. I had started building my own path in silence. Tomorrow they would see that path whether they were ready or not. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, the way I did before every high-stakes briefing. Calm, focused, ready. The house was silent around me, but inside my chest something had shifted. Not with noise or declaration, just a quiet, final settling into place. I was no longer waiting for them to understand who I had become. The Crystal City Convention Center buzzed with early morning energy when I arrived at 0745. Security lines moved quickly for those with pre-cleared badges. I walked through the dedicated DoD entrance, my Navy suit crisp, hair pulled back neatly, and my NSA credentials clipped to my lapel. The weight of the lanyard felt familiar, grounding. I had reviewed the agenda weeks ago. My name was listed simply as Senior Analyst, NSA, Cyber Defense Evaluation Lead. No fanfare, no warning for anyone in the room. The main briefing hall was already filling with executives, program managers, and technical teams from competing firms. I took my seat at the evaluation panel table near the front, next to 2 colonels from Cyber Command and a deputy director from the Department of Homeland Security. My tablet was open, notes prepared, questions queued. I didn't scan the room for my family. I didn't need to. I knew they would be here. Ryan's startup was one of the 6 companies presenting today. At 08:20, the first teams began filing in. I kept my expression neutral as Ryan and 2 of his engineers entered through the side doors. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a sleek presentation deck. Lauren followed a few steps behind. My parents arrived moments later, Dad in his usual navy blazer, Mom clutching her purse like a shield. They took seats in the observer section about halfway back. Ryan spotted me almost immediately. His steps faltered. He stared, confusion flashing across his face as he registered my position at the front table. My father noticed next. His eyebrows drew together. Mom leaned over and whispered something to him. I kept my eyes on my tablet, reviewing the technical specifications one final time. The session moderator stepped to the podium at exactly 0900. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Project Aegis Technical Evaluation. Today, we will hear presentations from 6 qualified vendors. Our evaluation panel includes representatives from the NSA, Cyber Command, and DHS. The lead technical reviewer for today's session is Senior Intelligence Analyst Harper Kane from the National Security Agency. Ms. Kane will provide the primary assessment on cyber resilience, integration feasibility, and compliance with classified requirements. A ripple moved through the room. Several heads turned toward me. Ryan's face went pale. My father sat up straighter, mouth slightly open. Mom's hand froze halfway to her water bottle. I stood calmly, adjusted the microphone, and began the opening remarks I had prepared. Thank you. As lead evaluator, my role is to ensure that whichever solution we recommend meets the highest standards for national security. I will be asking detailed technical questions during each presentation. All responses will be evaluated for accuracy, innovation, and risk mitigation. My voice stayed even, professional, the same tone I used in secure briefings. I didn't look at my family. I didn't need to. Their silence was loud enough. The presentations began. 3 companies went first. I asked precise questions about encryption protocols, failover mechanisms, and zero-trust architecture. Each team answered carefully, aware that my recommendation could influence hundreds of millions in funding. Then it was Ryan's turn. He stood at the podium, tablet in hand, and launched into his pitch. His voice started strong, but I could hear the slight tremor when he glanced my way. He described their revolutionary layered security platform, the same one I had helped him refine in its earliest version years ago. When he finished, I leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Kane," I said, tone neutral and respectful, "can you walk us through how your proposed system addresses the latency thresholds outlined in the classified NSA memo dated 12 March? Specifically, how does your architecture maintain performance under sustained adversarial DDoS conditions exceeding 800 gigabits per second?" Ryan blinked. His engineers shifted uncomfortably behind him. We can revisit that section," he said, voice tightening. "Our current model shows acceptable performance in simulated environments." I nodded once. "Acceptable is not sufficient for this requirement. Please submit a revised technical addendum addressing the exact thresholds by close of business tomorrow. We will need independent validation before any further consideration." The room went very still. Ryan managed a stiff nod. "Yes, ma'am." He sat down. My father stared at the floor. My mother looked between us, confusion and something closer to shock written across her face. I continued the session without missing a beat, asking detailed follow-up questions to the remaining teams. My questions were fair. My tone remained professional, but the power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. By the time the morning session ended at 11:45, the truth had settled over my family like a heavy weight. The daughter they had dismissed as stuck in a desk job was the one holding the pen that could sign off or reject their biggest opportunity in years. I closed my tablet, stood, and walked toward the exit. As I passed the row where my family sat, my father's eyes met mine for the first time that morning. There was no pride yet, only stunned recognition. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. The afternoon session resumed at 1300 with a sharper tension in the air. The evaluation panel table felt heavier now, every question carrying more weight after the morning's revelations. I sat with my tablet open, notes updated, and my posture straight, the same disciplined focus I brought to every classified review. Ryan's team was scheduled to present their revised technical overview after the lunch break. When they returned to the podium, Ryan's usual confidence had thinned. His engineers looked tense. My parents sat in the same row, silent and watchful. I could feel their eyes on me, but I kept my attention on the presentation. Ryan began again, this time walking through adjustments they had hastily prepared. He spoke about enhanced encryption layers and improved failover protocols. His voice was steadier than it had been in the morning, but I could hear the careful wording, the attempt to mask gaps I already knew existed. When he finished, I leaned forward slightly and spoke into the microphone. Mr. Kane, thank you for the update. Could you clarify how your revised architecture specifically mitigates the supply chain vulnerability identified in the latest NSA threat assessment, the one involving third-party firmware updates? The room quieted further. Ryan paused, consulting briefly with one of his engineers before answering. We've implemented additional validation checks at the integration stage, he said. We believe this addresses the risk at an acceptable level. I nodded once, keeping my expression neutral. Acceptable risk is not the standard for this project, Mr. Kane. The requirement calls for zero-trust verification at every firmware touchpoint, including automated cryptographic signing and real-time anomaly detection. Your current proposal still leaves a potential window during the update cycle. I'll need a detailed mitigation plan addressing this exact gap, including timelines for implementation and independent testing validation. Please submit it within 72 hours. Ryan's jaw tightened. He gave a short nod. Understood. We'll have it ready. I continued with follow-up questions for the remaining teams, each one measured and technical. I praised strong elements where they existed and pointed out weaknesses with precision, never raising my voice or injecting personal feeling. This was my job, objective evaluation for national security, not family reckoning. But every question I asked Ryan's team landed like a quiet hammer. The gaps I highlighted were the same ones I had gently pointed out to him years ago when he first shared early designs with me. Back then, he had brushed them off, calling my concerns overly cautious. Now, those same concerns were deciding whether his company advanced to the next round. By the time the final presentation wrapped at 16:30, the atmosphere in the hall had changed. Executives who had once dismissed the NSA analyst as just another government reviewer now treated my comments with clear respect. Several approached me afterward to thank me for the clarity of my feedback. As people began filing out, my father waited near the side exit. He looked older than he had at dinner the night before. My mother stood beside him, clutching her purse. Ryan and Lauren lingered a few steps behind, Ryan's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I walked over to them calmly, stopping a respectful distance away. Harper, my father said, his voice lower than usual. We didn't know. I met his eyes steadily. I tried to tell you, multiple times. Ryan stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. That latency question this morning and the firmware thing just now. You were right. I should have listened years ago when you warned me about those exact issues. I didn't soften the truth. You presented your proposal. I evaluated it based on the requirements. Nothing more, nothing less. My mother's eyes were shiny. All this time, we thought you were just sitting behind a desk. We had no idea you had this kind of responsibility. I know, that's why I stopped explaining. The silence stretched between us, thick with years of missed conversations and misplaced assumptions. Ryan looked at the floor for a long moment before speaking again. You didn't humiliate me up there. You could have, but you were fair. I was doing my job, the same job you've spent years dismissing. My father cleared his throat. We need to talk, properly. Not here. I nodded once. Not tonight. I still have follow-up briefings. We can speak when the evaluation period is over. I turned to leave, but my mother reached out and lightly touched my arm, the first time in years she had initiated contact like that. Harper, we're proud of you, she said, voice cracking slightly, even if we didn't show it. I offered a small, calm smile. Thank you. I'll see you soon. As I walked out of the convention center into the late afternoon light, the weight I had carried for years felt noticeably lighter, not because they had finally seen me, but because I no longer needed them to in order to know my own worth. The evaluation wasn't personal, it was professional, and for the first time, my family had witnessed exactly who I had become. 3 weeks later, the final evaluation report for Project Aegis had been submitted. My recommendations were accepted without changes. Ryan's company did not advance to the final round. The decision was based purely on technical merit and risk assessment. Nothing personal. Still, the outcome sat between us like an unopened letter. I invited the family to my apartment in Arlington on a quiet Saturday evening. It was the first time they had all been to my place. The open living room overlooked the Potomac, with clean lines, minimal furniture, and a single bookshelf that held my commendations tucked between technical manuals. No need to hide anything anymore. My father arrived first, carrying a small wrapped package. He looked uncomfortable in his own skin, as if the familiar role of patriarch no longer fit quite right. My mother followed with a homemade apple pie, still warm. Ryan and Lauren came last, Ryan carrying a bottle of wine that looked more expensive than anything we used to drink growing up. We ate at my small dining table. Conversations started slow and careful, questions about my apartment, my commute, the weather. No one mentioned the summit at first. Then, over coffee and pie, my father set his cup down and looked at me directly. "Harper, we owe you an apology," he said, voice rough. "A real one, not just for the summit, for years." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "We thought we knew what success looked like," he continued. "We pushed Ryan because he was loud about his dreams. We assumed you were safe, predictable. We never asked what you were actually doing. That was our failure." My mother nodded, eyes glistening. "Every time you called, we talked about Ryan's company or your father's work. We never asked about your briefings, your promotions, the things that kept you up at night. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Ryan shifted in his chair, staring at his hands. "I took your help and never gave you credit. Those early grants, the late-night reviews, I acted like it was all me. And then I stood in that room and watched you run the entire evaluation like it was nothing. You were impressive, Harper. More than that, you were in command." I took a slow breath. The old instinct to smooth things over rose up, but I let it pass. "I didn't do any of it for your approval," I said quietly. "I did it because it was the work I chose. I stopped explaining myself a long time ago because every time I tried, it turned into another comparison, another reminder that I wasn't following the path you wanted." Lauren spoke softly for the first time. "We all saw it today. You weren't trying to hurt Ryan. You were just really good at your job." Ryan gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "Yeah, turns out my little sister is the one who decides which technologies protect the country, and I was too busy bragging to notice." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It felt necessary, like clearing old debris before rebuilding. "I'm not asking for anything big," I said finally. "I don't need parades or headlines. I just want respect for the choices I made, and space when I need it, one step at a time. If you can give me that, we can try again." My father reached across the table and placed the wrapped package in front of me. Inside was a framed article from a defense industry journal. The headline mentioned Project Aegis success factors. My name was listed in the contributors section, not as Ryan's sister, but as Senior Intelligence Analyst Harper Kane. I had this printed the day after the summit. It's been on my desk at work ever since. I should have framed it sooner. I ran my fingers over the glass. "Thank you. This means something." We talked longer into the evening, not about fixing everything at once, but about small things, my current projects, the unclassified ones, Ryan's plans to strengthen his next proposal, Mom's garden. There were awkward pauses and careful wording, but underneath it was the beginning of something honest. Later, after they left, I stood at the window looking out over the river. The lights of DC glittered in the distance. I didn't feel triumphant or bitter, just steady. I had walked into that summit room without needing them to see me, and because I hadn't needed their validation to become who I was, their recognition, when it finally came, felt like a quiet bonus rather than a requirement. The victory wasn't in them finally understanding my worth, it was in the simple truth that I had already known it all along.